Now we're going to open a similar scene to demonstrate how you can use AOVs to determine your final render settings. In this scene, I'm going to start by turning everything to 0. Even though we don't have any samples, you will notice you still see an image. That's because 0 squared is 1. So we have one AA camera sample. This is a good way to start working because you have a fast and responsive UI. You can get things like lights and geometry into rough position before increasing sampling. With only one sample, the image is pretty noisy. The first way we can begin to reduce noise is actually to increase our light samples. Just doing that, without increasing camera samples, will remove some of the noise. A good value is usually 2 or 3. You generally wouldn't want to go higher, because the light samples are going to be squared and multiplied by camera AA samples. I'm going to start with 2. Already I noticed a difference in those specular bits and in the shadows. Let's isolate the shadow pass. Looks okay. If you have noise in your shadows, but not the rest of your direct diffuse, you probably need to increase light samples. Now I'm going to begin increasing camera samples to eliminate noise in my direct diffuse. I'm going to put a value of 3 and check my direct diffuse. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Shadows are still a little noisy, but I'll leave those where they are for now before I decide if I need to increase my light or camera AA samples. I don't have any indirect lighting yet because all my values are at 0. Let's start indirect lighting with indirect diffuse. I'm going to start by sliding it up to 2. So now I have 36 samples. And let's take a look. Nice, no noise. Next, I'm going to set specular to 1. Now I will have indirect specular. However, before I look at indirect, I'm going to take one more look at direct specular. And uh-oh, that's still noisy. To clean that up, I actually have to increase the camera AA samples. I'm going to bump those up to 4, and maybe even 5. Wow, 5, and direct specular is looking beautiful. With the specular slider set to 1, I now have 25 indirect specular samples, and they look good. Remember those diffuse samples? Let's return to those. When we had the camera samples at 3, there were 36 indirect diffuse samples. Now that we're at 5, we have 100 samples. Let's try turning it back down to 1 for a total of 25 samples and see if the image still looks okay. I have the 2 images here, and they look pretty identical. I'll include them below in the video. The difference is with 1 sample, the render took 41 seconds, and with 2 samples, it took 1 minute 8 seconds, a 40% increase in render time. That's a big difference in our final render time.
Now repeat the same process with transmission, subsurface scattering, and volume indirect. Remember, camera AA is a multiplier for these values.